Hello everyone, my name is Omar. This is my partner Tristan, Anthony, and G. Today we're going to discuss about ways of enhanced oil recovery for gas injection. Here's the layout. Today we're going to discuss about the process of gas injection, the viability of gas injection, past case study, and current case study. So I would like to begin with this image. This is the first oil well commercial by Edwin Drake in 1859. So if you are familiar with it, you are good. If not, you need to take Vitro 101 again. So the process for gas injection. Gas injection is the most used application for enhanced oil recovery. Originally in the past, it was used as water lift in old mines, but in oil and gas industry, it used to increase the number of hydrocarbons. How does it work? Many companies use the produced natural gas as the injected gas because it is less volatile under high pressure, and also it lightens the fluid viscosity and the fluid density and helps to migrate the fluid in the reservoir up to the wellbore and to the production well. Here's an overview about how the process of gas injection. We have two wells. Wells for injecting gas, which helps to lighten the fluid in the reservoir and to lighten its viscosity and density, and it works as a mechanism to push also the fluids up to the producing well. So there's two most popular methods used for gas injection. One of them is the immiscible gas injection, and the other one is water alternating gas injection. The difference between both of them, for immiscible, it is injection of gas that doesn't mix with hydrocarbons in the reservoir, and it also works as a mechanism to push all the fluids. But for the water alternating gas injection, it works as immiscible, which means it does mix with the hydrocarbons, and we inject it followed by water so that it lowers also the viscosity and density of the reservoirs. And nearly all of gases injection works as a mechanism to move and to lighten the fluid viscosity and the density. So for the immiscible gas injection, it is used as to maintain the reservoir pressure, and as I mentioned before, it doesn't mix with the hydrocarbons in the reservoir, and it works to push all the reservoir fluids up to the well and to be produced into different wells. Here's our common forms used for immiscible gas injection. One of them is to maintain the pressure in the reservoir. The second one is to increase the recovery for oil, high shrinkage oil. And the third one is we inject immiscible gas to stop migrating oil into the gas cap. So I'm also going to discuss about the carbon dioxide injection. The only difference is in the CO2, it works as expanding the wellbore, and it swells nearly like mixed with the fluids in the reservoir, and it works as swelling, and then we will produce it in the next producing well. Here's a photo showing the CO2. How does it work? We inject it here, and it expands the wellbore. Second thing, it swallows the oil and reduces its viscosity and the density. And the other one is moves the oil and the CO2 together up to the production well. Next one. So we need to take into consideration the designs for gas injection and the patterns. As we discussed in the UR class, there are some designs for oil and water flood, and also there are some designs for gas injection as well. The 5-spot, 7-spot, 9-spot, as we have discussed with Professor Haas. We need also to consider having a reservoir that has low structural relief, so all the fluid migrates to the high. Next one. For the operation approach for gas injection, we need to know why we are injecting gas. Are we injecting produced natural gas, or are we purchasing new gas? We need to know the design for gas injection. We need also to know the injection location and the injection depth. So here we need to make sure that we have all the answers for this question, and then go ahead with the process. And now, leaving with G, my friend.
So the Bartlesville sand is being found in the shoestring trend in Kansas, and it is by the east of the Granite Ridge, which extends from the south part of Kansas, a few miles of Arkansas City. There are about 30,000 acres under production in this area, and there are approximately 120 million barrels of oil produced 10 years before the year 1934. And the daily production in this area is close to 30,000 barrels. The case study in choose for our gas injection past case study is did by the Ampere Company on the Madison Block in Township 22, Range 11, East in Greenwood County. The Madison Block is part of the Bartlesville shoestring sand in Kansas. The Madison Block have 1,150 productive acres, and the 980 acres is under pressurizing. At the year 1927, when the well just being drilled, the average 101 producing wells production was 165 barrels per day and have very little water content. The history. The Madison Block used air and gas drive from the year 1927 to the year 1932 to increase production compared to the normal decline rate. They injected 550,000 cubic feet of gas. The production started to decline after April 1932, and they figured out that it was too little energy being added to the sand in comparison to the amount of gas being removed. Therefore, in March 1932, large quantities of natural gas was applied to the block. From the time March 1932 and 3 years and 8 months gas injection, a large amount of gas is being pressurized to November 1935. 652 million cubic feet is being injected. The result. The gas injection made an increase in production for about 343,000 barrels compared to the estimate made by the normal decline rate curve. Problems. From October 1927 to March 1928, the Ampere Company injected air into the well for repressurizing. The air caused corrosion in tubing, diluted the gas, and decreased the viscosity of produced oil. After that, they changed the air to gas. The first 6 months after a large amount of gas injected into the well, the production started to decline, caused the back pressure. The back pressure reduced the production, but the production increased significantly after 6 months being used the 5-spoke gas injection pattern. For the future, after 3 years and 8 months production, the company studied several wells under normal operation for 10 to 14 years in the same region to estimate the upper limit of this region and find out if it's hard to be doubled in production. They also studied wells using gas injection method for better recovery that can estimate for future increments on production if they keep using the pressurized gas to increase the pressure in the reservoir. The comparison get about 57% increase in production. It is better than the 45% model they get from other projects, and the future operation of this field they need to be considered from operating economics.
So I wanted to look at a different kind of method that's been being used recently. It's called water alternating gas injection, which I mentioned in the previous presentation, otherwise known as WAG. Some of the benefits it reduces residual oil saturation. It keeps the gas from breaking through to nearby wells, which is a main problem with gas injection, is gas leakage. It doesn't require miscibility pressure or specific composition. And it has a better mobility ratio because injecting just gas, it will decrease the viscosity, or it'll decrease the mobility of the fluids, which makes it harder, or increase mobility of the fluids, which makes it harder to control. However, if you inject water with it, it decreases the mobility of the gas and the fluid, which makes it easier to push the front forward and control. And there's also a separation of phases in vertically heterogeneous wells, which is easier for production. So I wanted to look at BP's Magnus Field, which is on the North Sea continent, or UK continental shelf in the North Sea. And as you can see, it's pretty north, so the weather conditions are definitely going to be rough. And if you look down here at the Shetlands, those are also going to come into play later on. So the Magnus Reservoir is a late Jurassic sandstone that sits above the lower Cambridge Clay Formation, as you can see on the diagram over here. It's actually stacked two different stacked turbidites, which are deep sea deposits, if you remember from historical geology. And in the oil in the reservoir is actually light. So in the beginning, they were using enriched oil because they were getting very lean gas. However, they found that it wasn't economic, so they could just use the lean gas to push it through. And they actually first produced oil from the Magnus in 1983, and that continued until around 1995, where seawater broke into the wells and created mass scale problems. And water flooding has been performed since then, or until 2002. So when they implemented WAG, it was actually a tertiary recovery method. With a residual oil of 25% and 1.5 billion barrels of oil in a favorable geology, they definitely wanted to keep producing, even though they've had scale problems and water flooding problems in the past. And by 2012, 10 years after it started the WAG method, they had 18 million standard barrels of oil recovered. And actually, recently, BP sold the remaining 75% ownership they had to EnQuest, actually in September. So it's still being produced and being used by EnQuest. So the Magnus Reservoir is actually split into 3 separate panels by natural fractures. And each of those, from those panels, there are 4 injectors and 6 producing wells. And they actually have future plans, which they may have enacted by now. I didn't see any recent updates, but they had recent future plans to expand into the LKCF below it. And because these are separated by fractures, they can independently maintain these panels separately, which allows them to get a better observation of the variations of oil recovery efficiency, so they know what works and what doesn't work. And in these panels, they keep each one at 5,000 psi average pressure. And they started off in their water alternating gas injection with a 1-to-1 water to gas ratio. And they found that as the reservoir matures and gets more complex, they were going to plan on using 3-to-1 water to gas ratio, and that was going to take 6 to 8 years. However, they did run into some problems, because as a tertiary recovery method, water alternating gas is very complex, especially on these small, older platforms. And have very strict component alignments that if they break, it can delay the whole entire region. They have a very unstable gas import. They actually weren't producing with gas until they had a 400-kilometer pipeline connect them to the West Shetlands, where there was stranded gas that they could use. And so they didn't want to operate solely relying on that because their import rate isn't stable. So they have a staggered gas injection schedule. The independent WAG panels, while they can be a benefit in that you can observe each one independently, they also come with the downside of, since they're old facilities, if you miss a warning on one facility, it can ruin it for the rest of them. So it's kind of like a domino effect. You got to be careful in maintaining all of them. They also deal with rough weather, which of course comes with the, which also influences the WAG panels. And also, since they're smaller, older facilities, it takes them, I think, 3 days to switch from water to gas injection, which, since they switch multiple times and often, it really slows down the process and makes it difficult. And they have run into mistakes in the past. In 2008, they actually shut down one of their injection wells so that they could drill. But they did it to maintain the reservoir pressure because they thought that if they increase the gas injection rates in the other injectors and thus decreasing the water injection rates, it'll keep the pressure around 5,000. However, it ended up overloading the reservoir with gas, and they ended up producing gas back. And there was cutback in all the production reservoirs. And they ended up having such a high volume of gas to water that they had to stop injecting gas for 3 months before the WAG ratios went back to normal. And since then, their WAG scheduling has been completely overhauled, and they no longer change it for convenience. They only change their scheduling to match the ratios. So if they're drilling, it doesn't matter. They have to match the ratios. And the results in the Magnus fields from 2012, they found that, using the differences in densities and the decline curve analysis, they could determine which oil was produced with normal recovery and which oil was produced with WAG. And they actually found that 40% of the 18 million standard barrels of oil was produced from the WAG method, which is good for a tertiary recovery method. And they also found that out of the 175 BCF gas they used, they found that 18 million standard barrels, with a gross efficiency of 9.8 MCF per STB and a net efficiency of 3.5 MCF per STB, which is a good ratio considering MCF is what, $3, $3.20, and STB is 52. So it also not only increased production, but it also extended the life of the Magnus Reservoir to past 2028.
Looking at gas injection, we took a 2 minutes. Okay, well, I'll go quickly. Looking at gas injection, the three main things we wanted to look at for viability were cost effective, if it's efficient, and if it's feasible. Because if it's none of these things, then you're not going to want to do the project to begin with. One of the case studies we looked at was of the UBED field. It was actually a simulation study. They did gas injection, water alternating gas, and water flooding. I showed the results of the natural depletion, and then with the gas injection, they had eight producing wells and 3 injecting wells in a crestal pattern on the reservoir. They had an initial predicted 224 million STVs, and while the gas injection did come out as the lowest of the 3 enhancement projects, WAG and water injection beat it only by a little bit. It had an added 20 million barrels, and I think WAG and water flood only had an extra 5 or so on top of that. So it held up against them pretty well. The project life on the gas injection case, is shortened by a lot just because of the nature of gas injection compared to water flood and WAG operations. The main 4 contributing things to whether or not a project is viable from what we were able to deduce from this case study was injection cycle time, required soaking time, optimal shut-in period, and the injection pressure itself. Obviously, time is money, so getting the right time periods for these is important. Injection pressure, it can depend greatly on where you're at as well. You don't want to go too high, you don't want to go too low. But getting that just right is what can drive to be a viable project. Overall, we realized that gas injection itself is a very viable process. It has been used for years and will continue to be used for years to come. It's proved to be innovative. I mean, they're already making new ways, water alternating gas injection. They've come up with other types of forms of it, I'm sure, to improve upon. It's a very cheap method compared to other forms, and it doesn't have many downfalls. One of the only downfalls is that it, getting the gas to inject and then gas leakage sometimes in some of the operations. And then there are any questions.